All right, good morning, good evening, good night. Welcome into the Nifty Q Show. I'm interviewing founders, leaders, and awesome builders in the NFT industry. Today, I'm sitting with Mr. Gon, head of game development and Parallel, a sci-fi trading card game on Ethereum. We'll be discussing the play-to-earn ecosystem, merging AR, VR with NFT collectibles, parallel gameplay, and much more. Mr. Gon, what is going on, my man? We're like the only two people not at NFT LA. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm not good with large groups of people anyway, so it's probably it's okay for me, you know.
Awesome. Well, not large groups, but we do have a group of individuals tuning in here today. Shout out to the people who are tuning in live. We are going to be on audio afterwards as well, 24 hours after the fact. Listen, I've been trying to get you guys on for a minute, so I'm happy to talk parallel again. It's been like a year, right, since we
Yeah, I'm
last talked
I'm
with you.
excited to do it. I'm pretty bad at social media, so it's probably my fault. I don't check my messages as often as I should, especially the ones that are somewhat hidden to me. But yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to like sort of check back in after a year and see where we're at.
Yeah, that's going to be a good origin piece and talk that I can't wait to get into. Before we get started here, you guys did just have a partnership announcement with, and I'm making sure I get this right, Superconductor. What is going on just for like the latest on that alpha? What's that?
Yeah, what is going on? I mean, I can't speak too much about it, but we did announce a partnership with Superconductor, which is sort of a an organization founded by the Russo brothers and Justin Lin, and they're helping us sort of facilitate the media arm of some parallel projects. That's probably as much as I can say, but we're looking to, expand outward from games into some other stuff, and I think they're going to be helping us.
Yeah, you mentioned some of your projects. I feel like right before the episode we talked about how Parallel is doing is so has so much depth almost of what you guys are doing that it's almost tough for some people to get a handle on all the projects that you're involved in. So we're gonna kind of go out of the norm here. Just break down real quick what you think like Parallel is in like an elevator style pitch.
Yeah, I mean, okay, this is gonna sort of branch a little bit from what I've been saying, but like essentially, Parallel is an IP. We've got a story that we want to tell about the future of humanity or what is humanity and all that stuff. But the first pillar of that is going to be the card game that we're building. So what I would say is, you mentioned that we have a lot going on, and sometimes it can be hard for people to sort of keep up with everything. The one thing I will say is just make sure that you read up on the card game, maybe listen to podcasts or whatever. This is shameless plug for my podcast on your podcast, but listen to the podcast and get a sense for what the initial product offering that we are putting out there is. And then if that interests you, you could dive a little bit deeper into some of the other things. Like I said, we're branching off into other forms of media. Of course, there's the Echelon Foundation, which is separate but related to Parallel. There's things like Inbox and all of the Web3 tools that we've been looking into. So yeah, there's a lot, but at its core, it's a sci-fi card game about the future of humanity.
Yeah, that was a good basic breakdown there, and we'll get into a lot as this conversation goes on. But from just your origin perspective and like what you're doing now, you mentioned that you have your own podcast. I want to get that name out real quick because you did say that you're hosting that, and I listened to one episode. But what's that name, and then we'll jump into your origin.
Sure, yeah. So the Parallel podcast is called Life in Parallel. I am one of the hosts along with my fellow game designers. Sometimes, I solo pod and I interview some people, but generally speaking, it's me and the game designers who also happen to be friends of mine, kind of shooting the shit, talking video games. There was an episode recently all about Elden Ring, so it's
Uh,
not just full, Life in Parallel.
have you always created content? Those are two different jobs, right? Content creator, and then also being a head of game development and developing Parallel. Have you?
Yeah, so yes, the short answer to that question is yes. I've always been creating content. When I went to high school and university, and then even after that, I was in a band or several bands. We used to go on tour, so I was creating, that sort of stuff for a while. And that was a lot of fun, creating art, I suppose. And then from there, I had all this audio equipment, and so I started doing podcasts. This will all kind of tie together. So I started doing podcasts first for myself, and then a good friend of mine, who people now know as Kalos, one of the leaders of Parallel, had another organization, and a lot of news stories were coming out of that organization. So I said to him, like, it'd be interesting if you could tell your own stories and control the narrative. Why don't I do a podcast for you guys? So I started doing a podcast for them. That sprung into a whole podcast network. So I was helping other people create podcasts under that umbrella. Uh, and yeah, and then from there, it was just like always, I always enjoy talking to people.
Yep.
I'm very quiet, generally speaking, but you put a mic in front of me and I won't shut the fuck up. Oh, sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, go
Am I
ahead,
allowed?
man. Keep
Yeah, yeah.
going.
Yeah, I won't shut the fuck up. So there's that. But then also my whole life, maybe it's part of the creative element. I've always been obsessed with uh, games and game design and mechanics of games. For me, more interesting than the game is like how they introduce something new to a game or how they flavor it differently than other games or whatever. There's like subtle nuances. Like maybe I've played Shoots and Ladders before, but maybe there's a version of the game where something different happens and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So it's just a modified version of this game, but you've modified it in such a way that it's now interesting. Like, okay, I'll give you a practical example. So there's a game called Risk. Obviously, everyone knows Risk. There's a version of the game called Risk Legacy where every time you play the game, it modifies the board permanently. So the next time you play the game, those modifications are there. So you can add bridges to countries, remove bridges. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do that I won't get into. But like I was like, okay, so that's interesting. Everyone's played Risk before, but not everyone's played this version of it. And now it's like completely fresh, even though the core rules are kind of the same. Anyway, so I've always been obsessed with that. And so when it came time to make a card game, uh, or to make a game, Kalo said, hey, we want to make an NFT based game. Do you have any ideas for us? And I'll tell the story again because I've told it before, but I said no. I mean, I said yes, but really I didn't have any ideas. Went to bed, and a few nights later, I woke up at 4 a.m., started scribbling on my notebook, and then the bones for Parallel was born. And I would be doing my team a disservice if I didn't shout out Carson, and especially Connor, aka Merchant, for like taking those bones and really making filling it out.
Awesome, man. I've got a couple comments here in the chat that I want to get to before we dive deep into those pieces there. Flubber's asking, how's your hodgepodge collection of donated NFTs coming along, Mr. Gon?
Oh, incredible. Yeah. So I've always been obsessed. I shouldn't say always, but as soon as I learned about NFTs and the idea that Project Rug and like all of these things happen, I was just like, what happens to these abandoned NFTs? They're given that they're non-fungible and will live on hopefully into eternity. Like, what do people do with them? Do they just like let them die on the blockchain vine, if you will? And so for the longest time, I wanted to open a museum of oddities. I thought it'd be hilarious, not hilarious, interesting to see all of these things that like people discarded over time. One man's trash is another man's treasure. And so I decided finally I was going to do it. And I ran a contest recently on our Twitter account, at Parallel NFT Pod. Another shameless plug. I ran a contest.
Don't everyone leave to this new podcast. Stay here right now.
No. But I ran a contest on the Twitter, and I said anyone who sends me a NFT will be entered in. An NFT they don't want anymore, that's part of like maybe a rug project or just something that's deceased or died on the vine, will be entered into this contest. And I've created an OnCyber gallery. And I had to buy a bigger space, and apparently the OnCyber spaces are not cheap. I'll tell you that. I learned this firsthand. I bought a 99 panel gallery. So if you go to oncyber.io/Mr. Gone, you can see all of the discarded NFTs, and I love it. I love them all.
We're like kindred spirits, man. I once, when I was in CryptoVox, was like, what would be really cool is to have a museum of NFTs that actually did things, because often we assign like importance to NFTs maybe by people who maybe own them. Like, this NFT belonged to Vitalik, but we don't really have anything like when you go to a regular history museum and said like, this was the cup of Jesus Christ and they drank it at the Last Supper. It'd be dope to have NFT history in a way.
Right.
Like, this card with Parallel was played to win the tournament XYZ. So
yeah,
kindred spirits in a way. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love the like granularity that you can get with NFTs, that you can see like not only is this like, let's say a baseball bat from the World Series or whatever, but with an NFT, you like, this is the baseball bat that did X, Y, Z. Like you can see with absolute granularity, these are the items that were used or whatever in this way, and it's amazing.
Yeah, you have a lot of like game theory esque comments that you're making when it comes to like risk, right? Like you're talking about how, the board stays the same and like how you're viewing it from this like game developer mindset. So I don't really know how to kind of crack open your brain and kind of work like the into the conversation how you look at game development. But when did you know maybe that you were going to start working on, or is this your first attempt at building a game?
Oh no, I mean, certainly my most successful attempt, but not my first attempt. I have created a bunch of board games that I've forced people to play many times. I was just talking about this morning. I used to host a meetup in a very small apartment that I had once upon a time, and we would cram like 30 some odd people in there and set up a bunch of tables and play games. And some people would bring games that they had created, very rarely, but I was always busting out like these like janky. This was before even 3D printers, right? So I couldn't even get pieces. It was like on paper, all this janky stuff, and it never really like fit right. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is my first real crack at really getting the make the thing that I always wanted to make.
This is fucking cool, man. Like, what was like, was there a central tie-in or ethos to all the games you created, or were they all kind of individually unique? Like, I want to get more into this combo because that's unique. No, not many people like think about the strategies that come with like creating a game and all the game theory that comes along with it.
Yeah, so I mean, for the most part, I've for some reason I was focused on board games, and I kind of thought that the collectible card game market was a little bit difficult to break into. Like it would require a lot of ongoing support, right? Because like games like these, like Magic or Hearthstone or Runeterra, there's always new cards coming out, right? It's not just like here's the game and we're done.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, obviously there are some card games you can point to that you can buy as a set in a box and then that's the game. But like the best ones, in my opinion, are ones that are ongoing. So like I never really put my mind to it because I thought that would be much too much of an undertaking. So a lot of what I was doing was like, like I said, we were talking about Risk Legacy or something earlier. It's just like a modified version of you're taking all the elements of a board game that I liked, or some of the mechanics and elements of a board game that I liked, and mashing them together to make my own game. And for me, it wasn't about the theming. It could be sci-fi, it could be fantasy, it could be, people going to work at an office. Like that. That's just like the story you tell within the game to get people wanting to play. Every game has got like a flavor to it. But for me, it was more about like how does the game play. And when I say like taking elements from games, it's very much like music. Like all of the best artists, they don't just like make things up out of nothing, right? They've like absorbed in all of their favorite, either jazz musicians, rock musicians, R&B, whatever it is, and they make it into a hodgepodge, and then they spit out their own versions of those things, like kind of mashed together, right? And creating anything else is no different. Like so, like board games is just like here are the elements of the games that I like. Let's mash them together and see if they work.
So, what was the name of your most successful hodgepodge game that you created for these nights? Like, what was the name of the game, and what did you have to do in like a lightning question, if you could?
Yeah, so there was a the idea of the game. It's kind of hard to explain, but
Yeah.
it was code named, I guess, like elevator pitch, and um, the game was oh, what's that game on Nintendo called? Um, anyway, there was elevator action. Have you ever played the game Elevator Action for NES? Anyway,
No.
you it was a game where like a bunch of players would be riding up and down elevators in a building to try and essentially like collect things to put together. The theming was essentially they were trying to collect ideas to put together like a pitch for a story.
Uh,
And I won't get it too much into it, but like you're kind of running around an office building, grabbing your supplies and whatever, and then whoever can get all the stuff before the time is up. Then you kind of total up the scores and see who wins. But it was okay. I'll say that
Yeah.
it was okay. But I think that truly, having worked on Parallel, I realized that like my heart was never truly in any of those games really. Like I've always been a card game player at heart, so I'm glad that I'm here doing this as opposed to some of that other stuff.
How do those like early like days where you're creating these games for the first time, how does that play out in parallel today? Like how did that make you a better maybe game developer, or how do we see that in parallel today?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think like anything else is just kind of reps. I'm a strong believer. Again, I'll bring it back to music because that's another thing that I know is like you write a million bad songs before you write one good one. And I think that game design is no different. It's just like, okay, how do I learn from my failures so that I can get to a successful point? So like even in parallel, right? When we first started, it was like here's the outline for the game that I want to build. And I looked at it and I made some changes, and then I brought on Carson and he looked at it and was like, okay, well, idea B is not going to work because these reasons, so we need to adjust that, and like I think that uh, when you first start building something, especially early on when you're younger, you hold on to things a little too tightly and you're like, no, 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 this has to be there. This has to be there. Right. But you learn through failure or through whatever repetition that, okay, let's listen to everyone's points and make adjustments, see how they work. And then you can decide, okay, maybe it was better the other way, or maybe this is good. And then we bring in Merchant and he looks at like half this stuff and is like, okay, no, this half of the stuff needs to change in these ways because of X, Y, Z. And again, I'm not like, no, 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 no. We try it, we change, rather than 50%, maybe we change 45% or 40% or whatever it is. We redesign a bunch of the cards, and like you can't be too precious about things, and you have to kind of let the ideas flow. I think that's one of the lessons that I learned, because when you're by yourself in the early days building games, it's just you. You're kind of sitting there, and you sometimes get so deep into the weeds. You're like, I know what I want the players to do. Why aren't they doing it? you know,
Yeah.
why aren't they playing the game this way? But you have to realize, like, no, players are gonna, as long as it's not in the rules, players are gonna play however they want. They have their own sort of mindsets, and it's one of those things that you kind of learn over time.
Yeah, I forgot the actual like terminology for that kind of reaction. There's like a direct thing that you want the people to do, but there's often like once you put it out into the wild, something indirect starts to kind of put it, like come to fruition almost. Like that's exactly the point I feel like you're making. I want to touch on some of these comments here. You Prodigy saying, "Did you play Yu-Gi-Oh?" Which I think ties into probably like the trading card piece to this. We haven't had many, we've had many play to earn games and many play to earn projects here on the show, but not that many that are focused on building out like a fully fledged trading card game. So, what is the trading card industry in like not even Web 2, but just like in general, just physical trading cards? What does that look like today?
Sure. So, to answer the question, I have played Yu-Gi-Oh. I was not an avid Yu-Gi-Oh player. I mean, that's a little bit. Maybe I'm dating myself, but a little bit after my time. Like I was a huge Magic the Gathering player. I started playing Magic the Gathering in like beta slash revised. So uh, maybe that is fully dating myself, but there's that. And then obviously I played some of the other stuff like Android Netrunner was a big one for me. I'm trying to think of some of the other card games that have come and gone. I'm drawing a blank now that I'm on camera. But anyway, what does it look like? Well, I mean, for me, and it is still kind of the same, although the rarity scales varied wildly now. There's so many more different, like there's, when I first started playing card games, there was no hollow foil cards. There was no like alternate art cards, borderless cards, blah, 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 blah. Like all these variants, those didn't exist, right?
Why?
That's because they didn't think it was going to be a money making venture. So, okay, as an example, Magic the Gathering is probably the grandfather of all this stuff. And uh, I think it was Richard Garfield's initial intention was it was just going to be a closed loop game. So there was alpha, there was beta, and there was unlimited, and that was going to be it, right? That's all there was going to be in the game. But it did so well that they're like, okay, let's iterate on this further. Let's release card sets. And so they started releasing card sets. And obviously, it's kind of like, okay, let's talk about baseball cards for a second. Ken Griffey Jr. rookie cards are like not super valuable because there's so many of them on the market, right? They didn't rarity scale cards they thought people would want. What they did was, fuck, let's print more of them. People
Ah,
want them. Let's give the people what they want, right? Now they're a little bit more savvy and they're like, wait. We can create an industry out of this. Let's create rarity scales and let's make certain cards harder to get. And now they have collectors boosters, which is something they didn't have when I was a card gamer. And it's like, okay, so these booster packs are more expensive, but they have a higher likelihood of producing stuff that's even rarer. Maybe there's some stuff you can only get in these packs or whatever. Anyway, but at its core, it's still the same. Like you go into a your local game store. There's a glass box. You look in it and you can see all the shiny rare stuff and like ogle it and whatever. And that's my favorite part. Even to this day, I don't even play paper Magic that much anymore, but I'll still go into a card store, look at some of the cards, and be like, oh, look, that one's like $80. I don't even know why it's so expensive, but look at that. I kind of want it.
there's a distinct
You know?
smell to like a card shop too, because I remember going in there because I made like Zoid models and I played Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic and all this stuff, and there's like a
Yeah.
distinct nostalgic smell to those shops. I'm interested in this piece, man, of taking the financial aspect of this, which is essentially what you're doing when you add like crypto to a lot of things, is like just
Sure.
adding a financial aspect. There wasn't maybe a financial aspect to changing the meta, in the physical aspect of Magic the Gathering. Maybe there is, maybe I'm wrong. You can, school me on that, but I'm so interested in this gameplay that you're making where a player can have at one point a really valuable card, right? That can help them win games and maybe even more, cash, what have you. And then you guys change the meta and maybe that's worth 50% now. How do you view changing the meta with this financialization aspect built in?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of question slash dilemma slash whatever. I mean, the one thing that in my mind we always strive to do is rather than nerf cards, we want to buff other cards because by their nature, when you make something weaker, it feels much worse than making something else stronger. You know, so that's one of the things that we always want to look at. But of course, there'll always be nerfs. Now, in the case of Magic: The Gathering, because it's a paper game as well as a digital game, they don't do a lot of nerfing. What they'll do is just ban certain cards outright. We won't do that, but we'll have to sort of digitally adjust the cards. Now, as far as like the financial element is concerned, there's two things I'll say to that. One is that I think that anyone who enters into it from a financial perspective as opposed to a gaming perspective just needs to be super aware that this is a possibility. It's not, and I'll say it to anyone who will listen. Like you just, as with any NFT, let's forget about the games entirely. Like a lot of it is based on not just the rarity of it, but the desirability of it, right? Like the liquidity. How badly do people want this thing? And if that sort of dries up, like you can't blame the people. You just have to enter into it with the mindset of knowing like here are the possibilities of what I'm doing, right? And so I think it's important for everyone to know that like cards have the possibility of getting nerfed. So like, you know, if that's gonna be a problem for you, maybe don't
Yeah.
spend your life savings on parallel cards.
It's not like
One,
it's not a frozen state essentially.
right. But the second thing I will say is that like my goal is to communicate any changes that we plan to make far enough in advance so that people can adjust accordingly. Now, some people might say, okay, well, as soon as you make that announcement, that the price of that card is going to tank. But if it's still useful, like let's just say it is a broken card that is destroying the meta, okay, and we have to nerf it. If I give you enough time ahead of time, like isn't it maybe worth it for a industrious player to see, okay, some people are dumping this card. What if I buy it up right now and I know that I'm a good player, so I'm just gonna like destroy with it while it's still broken to earn whatever I can earn and then dump it later,
Yeah.
right? Like there's some balance there to be had. So I think that is interesting and not something that we'll have had seen in the past, right? Because none of these games, Magic or whatever, are directly play to earn in that way. So I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, I don't know the answer. That's the thing, right? Like I can't predict what's going to happen, and nor do I really want to comment on the secondary market prices of the cards to begin with, because like we have no control over it. Yeah, I mean, you can argue we have control over buffing and nerfing cards and whatever, but that's in service of the game. Like my goal is to make a fun, good, unbroken game, you know? And what impact that has on the secondary market is less of a concern to me, because at the end of the day, if the game sucks, then the secondary market's going to be worthless anyway, right?
Mm.
So I think it's probably best for me to just focus on making sure the game is as good as it can be.
Yeah, I want to get your take on the play to earn economy as it stands today. But before we get there later in the convo, I do want to touch on this last piece of like moving from analog trading card games in like a Magic the Gathering sense to maybe more digital and virtual. What changes happened that you can, being a player yourself over that long span of time, see in trading card games, right? You have the Hearthstones now. There's probably a couple others, of course. Like, what do those do now, and what changes have trading cards made up to today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting because I think that Hearthstone and even MTGA to a certain extent are more collectible card games as opposed to trading card games. And the distinction is because you can't trade the cards, which is something that we're trying to, solve for. But what differences? For me, the biggest one is, we just talked about it, is balance, right? You can dynamically adjust the game without having to issue a completely new set or new card or ban cards from play in order to make them work. So that's one big thing. It makes game design a little bit easier. Kind of makes sure that there isn't like a absolute finality to the things that you print. But from a game perspective, and things that make it more fun is you can do all sorts of crazy stuff in game. So like, you know, uh, altering stats on a card is a lot easier in a digital sense. Copying cards is something that is a lot easier in a digital sense. You can destroy cards, technically, like quote unquote destroy for the game, and then bring them back, or whatever, split them in half, mash them together, all sorts of things that like you can't really do from a physical perspective because it would be kind of cumbersome. Like, let's just say, as an example, melding two cards together. Maybe you meld two cards together in a physical game, and now you have to dig out a token or something that represents the melding of those cards, and maybe that token has to have special text because you're melding their abilities or you're doing whatever. Like there's a lot of caveats that you would have to make in a physical card game. Then in a digital card game, you just say, okay, these two cards disappear. Now let me show this new one on screen, and here's this like new crazy thing, you know. And that's just like scratching the surface of what you can do from a digital card game perspective. I think what you're actually doing is you're providing a tabletop card game simulator as opposed to a tabletop card game experience. Like it's not, they're based on the same principles, but it's not exactly the same thing.
Hmm. We could go down that rabbit hole for a long while, but a lot of people are here to hear about Parallel. A couple more of the questions I have here, as it's related to like analog or Web 2, essentially like trading card and collectible card games. What is like the largest amount that collectibles are going for right now that you know of? Like I know,
Like financially
Logan,
speaking?
yeah, like I know Logan Paul bought like a Pokemon card maybe for 500K or something like that.
Or yeah, he bought what he thought was an unopened box of Pokemon cards, ended up being GI Joe cards. But I don't know. Truthfully, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, probably people could point to the Black Lotus as being one of the rarest, most expensive cards. But like, what is an unopened box of Alpha Magic boosters or starter decks worth? I don't know. I mean, my sort of lack of knowledge in the financial aspect of these games doesn't just stop at Parallel. Like I don't really pay attention to that because like that's not the thing that motivates me, right? Like it is kind of fun to have stuff that's worth X amount of money. Like I said at the beginning of this, I collect records, I collect sneakers, I collect cards and whatever. And every once in a while, I'll look up like, oh, what's the most expensive thing in my collection? But I'm never selling it, so it doesn't matter what it's worth. Like I'm never gonna get rid of it. If anything, I'm gonna wear the sneakers into the ground. So like, who cares? So I don't really pay attention to that stuff, if we're being honest. The only time I care is when I have to pay the money. to buy the thing.
I see. I see. Okay, so we had you guys on a year ago about for Parallel. So it's been a long time. Let's talk on that origin story of Parallel just quickly. I know you touched briefly on like meeting your co-founders and things like this, but let's
Sure.
talk about what you guys have been up to today. We'll go into detail, and then the only thing I want you to kind of like touch on within this is one of your podcasts. This is like the third mention of your podcast on my podcast. So definitely go and check the Parallel podcast out. But one of them is titled "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Make a Game." Like if you could break that down within your journey of building Parallel over the last year.
Okay, well, there's a lot. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll just start with a really quick origin story. Is I've known a bunch of these guys for a long time. Kalos especially the longest. I mentioned earlier that we've worked on projects together, but I've known him since before that. Um, and during COVID, we were playing video games like Call of Duty and a bunch of other stuff just to like keep in touch, like in the same way that people might Zoom call each other, but we were doing it over the video game chat. And we're all tech guys, and we kind of decided, like, even me, I worked in tech before the game design stuff, and in between the music and game design stuff. We're all tech guys, and we decided, like, hey, what if we could do this better? Or not better, differently. Like, we could probably do our own version of this and entertain people during COVID or whatever. And then one of our friends, Oscar, who's an artist, had the idea that he kind of wanted to get into the NFT side of things, and Kalos had the wherewithal to be like, hold on, let's see if we can mash these two things together, And so he came to me and he was like, here's the tech. I didn't know anything about NFTs, but I kind of, he gave me a rundown and he's like, can you figure out a game that will work with this stuff? And I was, so then we did it and we got together and, from there we did at a point, Oscar was just like, look, this is becoming a full-time job. And for all of us, we thought it was just going to be evenings and weekends type thing. So we're quickly getting to a make it or break it scenario. So we had our first sale. We made enough money to pay 4 artists for a year, I believe. And we decided, at that point, we almost were like, we'll just refund everybody. They can keep the NFTs, they can have their money back, and we'll just call it a day. But because we made enough to pay 4 artists for a year, and the rest of us were not getting paid $0 from any of that sale stuff. We were like, let's just keep going. We'll pay those 4 guys for a year. We'll promise them a job for a year and see if we can take this to another level. And the entire time we were doing this, we explained to our community, look, we want to make this game. Here's how it works. Here's the game we want to play. Will you support us? Like Kickstarter style. Will you buy these NFTs to help us make the game? And then it just kind of took off from there. Now, as far as the how not worrying and making a game and what it's been like in the last year, there's a lot of things that I've learned, and I think one of the biggest things is like, especially in Parallel, there's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge in varying areas, and it's best to kind of just like worry about my part and trust my partners and the people that work for us to take care of their piece. And if they want my opinion on something or I want their opinion on something, we'll have conversations about it, and we routinely do work together. It's not super segregated like that, but we all trust each other to kind of take care of our piece. And sometimes, like, I don't really understand, even now a year later, living in the NFT space and losing money on a bunch of projects and whatever. Like, I don't really understand it at the same level as some of these other guys. So when they say, you know what, the NFT space wants this, or the NFT space, can handle this or whatever, I'm just like, okay. And at one point I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, spell this out for me. Like but you can't do that. That slows down progress, right? So in the same way that when I come to them and say, like, look, the cards got to work this way. Players are going to expect X, Y, Z. They don't question me on it. They're just like, you know what, the game, what gamers are going to be like. So like, if you say it has to be this way, that's the way it's got to be. And for a concrete example of this, right, is like in our initial sales, I believe the cheapest pack type was 0.01. And at that time, for the first pack drop, that was around like 18 to 20 US dollars or something. And everyone was like, well, why don't you charge more? Why don't you charge more? And I was like, no. If truly we want to make a game for gamers, we have to make something that non-crypto natives can afford. right? We want people to be able to get in here, not just NFT collectors, but people who are like, what is this thing? I don't want to throw thousands of dollars at it because like we all know that even just learning crypto is like a, there's going to be some financial mishaps you're going to make, and it's an expensive prospect. So let's make it easy on people. And then once that first pack drop was a wild success, people were like, okay, obviously they're going to raise the prices, and we didn't. And again, it's that same thing. Like our ethos is just like, let's make a game for you. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
the point is that like we all trust each other to do our thing, but it took me a while to sort of like realize like, wait, they got it. I got my piece. Let's just make the game that I've always wanted to make. And also another side of that is like, let's not worry about my insecurities. Like I said, like I've made other games before that people enjoyed to varying degrees, but like I was like, fuck, am I going to actually be able to do this? There's a lot riding on this now. A lot of people have invested in this and like, can I make this good? And the answer is yeah. I mean, now that like we have some people internally playing it and stuff, they're obsessed with it, which is great. And again, I can't stress enough that, now I need to shout out Alex, Carson, and Connor. Alex is the newest member of the gameplay team, but like they're the ones who really put it on their back and like took something good and made it great.
Yeah, you really like have a lot of aspects of like decentralized control there, or decentralized command. You and dealing with imposter syndrome, like all things that founders kind of need to get better at as they grow as leaders and founders of businesses. So that's really cool. So there's a lot of people that have been asking like detailed questions about Parallel itself, right? So I won't make Yummy Bear wait anymore. So we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves, but it was a question asked long ago. Can you explain composability a bit? Will there only be 1K Earthbreaker cannon across all types of games at once? So I guess break down like this move towards AR, VR, and then also the other games you're trying to create. Is that kind of good to set that foundation before we talk about Earthbreakers
Sure.
and
I mean,
augment cores? And
I think it's worth mentioning that we're in the midst of exploration currently, and what we want to do is just highlight the idea that when you buy into assets or NFTs as assets, they are exist on their own outside of a given game, right? So the fact that you can trade them on OpenSea, or you can send them to your friend, or they can send them to you, or whatever, and you don't need the interaction of a game or a client or anything, is important. And the reason why it's important is not only can you sort of make your own deals and create your own marketplaces, but you can use them however you see fit. So let me give you like a trading card game example first, and then we'll get into some of this other stuff. So Magic the Gathering, there's a format called Commander, right? And it wasn't an official format for a long time. Some people just took their Magic cards, created this format, and was like, hey, this is fun. And now it's become like a thing that people actively play, and you don't get that unless you have control over the cards. Like, what if the game client only said, hey, you can only do XYZ with these things? Then you would never get that kind of innovation. And so what we want to do is kind of highlight to people like, look, we have plans for these NFTs to use them in other ways that exist outside this card game, but that doesn't mean that other people can't also use them. Like, once you buy them, they're yours. You uh, if somebody else created a game, let's just say they created an arena style shooter, like a la Quake Arena or something, and they were like, we're gonna take Bored Apes, and we're gonna take whatever crypto walkers, and we're gonna take anything that has like a 3D model associated with it can be used in this game, and it doesn't even have to have an effect in game other than here is my avatar or whatever. But like, why not do that? And if somebody did that and they were like, we're gonna use parallel cards and we're gonna allow those parallel cards in that game, we wouldn't say no. We wouldn't be like, no, you're bastardizing our whatever. Like, no, no, no. If you wanna use the 3D assets that we're gonna make available, use them. If you want to walk around in Sandbox or Pixel, whatever, like, do it.
yeah, there's a couple of different questions I want to touch on here, but is it a couldn't or wouldn't do it? Because like I'm interested in that IP discussion. Could Bored Ape, if it was my Bored Ape, or if I'm using Parallel for an example, do you have any legal standing to tell them no if it's my Parallel card? How does that IP work if someone did want
Well,
to create that game?
I mean, I think it depends on the sort of legal pieces in place. Like, I believe that apes and punks and all the Yuga Lab stuff have like a particular caveat associated with them saying like you now have all the rights in perpetuity to this thing. Now, obviously, Parallel is in a bit of a different scenario because we're making a card game. So there's, X amount of a given card, and they're not one of ones, right? So we can't give
Mm,
one person the rights to, you own this card, you have the rights to the character on this card. There's a whole bunch of other people that also have that card. So it's a little bit different. But I think like our mentality, I don't
ethos. Yeah.
like, yeah, the ethos is basically like we want to promote people, uh, who are creators. So like as an example, there was like an asteroid mining NFT game that came to us early on and said, we really like the Ogden Core faction of the parallel universe. Would you mind if we allowed your NFTs in our game? And we immediately we're just like, go for it, man. Like, I don't even know. Our actual response was, I don't know if we could stop you, even if we wanted to. And
Mm.
I think that that's kind of like where we're at. It's just like, if somebody tried to make Parallel V2 and market it as like our game, but leverage whatever, like that's a different story. But if they're willing to like create something new using our NFTs, like why not? Maybe they could even apply to Echelon and start using Prime. Who
This
knows?
so the term that came back to me, which ties into this combo, is emergent. Oh god, I lost it again. It's like emergent reactions. I don't know, but this is really cool because like games like League came out of the same thing that you're talking about. Games like Dota, it's an
It-
emergent thing. Like Blizzard didn't say, "Hey, we're gonna create this." It was like a offshoot from a custom game.
so I talk about this all the time. So you look at things like Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike started as a mod to Half-Life. The Valve guys liked it so much they hired the guys who made the mod, and then they made Half-Life proper. Right. The same thing as Tower Defense started as a mod for Warcraft 3. Like the Tower Defense genre was a Warcraft 3 mod that then spawned a whole genre of games. Right. And then Dota again, a mod for maybe it was Warcraft 3 as well. I
It
don't
was,
remember.
yeah, Frozen Throne,
Um,
I think.
yeah, yeah. And then the whole MOBA thing got kicked off, right? And like I think it's giving people the sandbox to be able to do that stuff is as important as creating uh, a good game. Like for me, Parallel the card game will be a proof of concept that a we can make a card game that works. We can have tradable cards in a digital world, and it can be a fun game that utilizes tech, but doesn't like put that tech on a pedestal. Because I mean, you asked me before about my thoughts on um, other sort of crypto native games, and I'm not going to single anybody out, and I think anyone who's trying anything is doing a commendable job, and we're all just doing something different. But from what I've seen from some of these games, it's just like let me let me present staking in a way that is gamified, or let me show you how crypto works in a game. But that's not actually a game. It's just like here are some pretty pictures to go along with the financial elements of crypto,
Mm.
right? But what we want to do and what I want other people to do is like think about, okay, here is a fun game that I've come up with. Now let me see if I can fit crypto into this game, you
I,
know? And I think that like for us, it's what we're trying to do is proof of concept of that. And then if people want to use our NFTs to make other fun games, like, okay, they're your cards. In the same way that I could take Magic cards, a deck of playing cards, and some Yu-Gi-Oh cards and throw them together, like Wizards of the Coast isn't gonna knock on my door and be like, "Hey, don't do that." Like I can make it and if I teach you how to play this game that I've made up with all these cards, like that's on me.
it's a little bit of the aspect of like play and earn as opposed to play to earn. Like if you make a game play to earn, you're like essentially making the whole point of the game to earn as opposed to just
Right.
playing like you're saying. So I do want to get to one of the negative aspects of associating crypto with games and this play to earn economy that happened in the last 48 hours or even before that, because it actually happened about a week ago now. The Axie
Uh-oh.
Infinity
We're
hack.
talking about bridges.
No, I think it was I don't know if was it a bridge that actually happened.
Yeah.
Didn't look into the details of this Axie hack, but 600 about million was hacked here. What do you make of that current situation with Axie and the Ronin blockchain?
So I am certainly not an expert. You can take everything I say with 2 grains of salt because I'm a crypto moron. But from what I understand, it was actually no like Axie. What was stolen was Ethereum and USD. Um, nothing to do with the in-game currency or any of that stuff. And it was actually the bridge that was hacked. And it was from my understanding, they had 9 validator nodes and 5 of them got hacked, enough to take over the majority, and that's how this sort of came about. But I think that if you're gonna operate in a decentralized, and again, no, I don't know how it happened, and I'm not throwing shade on anything that they're doing. I think that like we're all kind of at the vanguard of this tech, and like no one really knows the right way to go about it. But I think that like hindsight from this is just like if you're going to operate in this way with this level of finance, you know, and you're going to tout yourself as being decentralized, it needs to be fully decentralized. The 9 nodes doesn't exactly feel uh decentralized enough, or at least now in hindsight isn't decentralized enough, like you probably need a lot more than that. And how you go about that or figure that out, I don't know, because like again, that's not tech that I'm familiar with. But yeah, I mean, what do I make of it? My one biggest takeaway is it's still kind of the Wild West, right? Like we're operating in a space where there are the rules are fast and loose, and no one really knows anything, and nothing is for. I mean, forget about like, okay, this is like a grand scale heist, if you will, but people are getting their apes stolen all the time. People are getting their wallets emptied all the time, and like that's insane. Imagine you had a Visa, right? And 1 out of every 10 times you used it, there was a chance that your card was going to get maxed out and you were going to lose all your money. You would never fucking use that credit card. You would never use it. You would be like, no chance, no chance. I'll stick to cash, right?
Yeah.
And that's why there's 2 sides to that coin, right? One is that's why regular people, quote unquote normies, whatever, are afraid of the space. But it's also why there's so much money to be had here, right? Is because the people who are smart enough, slash brave enough, slash stupid enough, slash whatever, to take advantage of this are making the money. Once it becomes more secure, the swings will be less wild, but it'll also mean more adoption. And so I think that's like really what it comes down to. Is we're at a time now where like things are still being kind of shaken out, and you kind of have to just kind of not roll with the punches. Obviously, no one wants to get robbed, but like you just have to realize that like it, as cliche as it is, we're early.
Yeah, we're nerding out on like gameplay here and like games in general. And Kobe had a really good blog post about how the alpha's found when someone can find out the new meta. And essentially, if you're listening to this podcast, us two, we're in this new meta of the world, and no one really in mass has come into it. And when they do, the alpha will be gone. And it's a lot like the Wild West that you were talking about, man. It's like the gold rush. Like chances are you come back, you'll probably get robbed and killed, but there's a chance that you make a solid penny for back in the day for the 1800s.
Yeah, and I will say this. So I don't like I said, I don't live in this space very often, and I don't listen to a lot of the content creators or what have you, but I just so happened to be in a Twitter space and Gary Vee was there, and I'm going to paraphrase him for a second, regardless of your feelings on Gary Vee. He said the smartest thing you can do is learn about and operate in this space. So let's just say, we'll bring it back to music again, as I always do. Let's just say you always wanted to be a musician, okay? And you spent years and years on the road and writing songs and doing all this stuff, which I did. But like you realize at a point, okay, maybe that life's getting a little bit too difficult. Maybe you can't raise a family selling records, maybe whatever. But what you can do is take those skills you learned and become a producer. You can open a studio. You can be a sound guy at a club. You can whatever. You can maybe become somebody who runs a company creating merchandise for musicians, right? And you can cater to their needs because you know what their needs are. You've lived the life long enough, right? And so I think the crypto space is the same. Maybe not all of us are meant to be project creators or influencers or whatever, but you live in the space long enough and you see what niches don't yet exist in the space. And maybe, again, you can become somebody who creates merch for crypto projects because you know what crypto projects need. Or you're somebody who can create, okay, you see this hack happen and you're like, okay, maybe I need to focus all of my energy on creating bridges for projects that are like ultra secure. Or maybe I just become a crypto security company, crypto auditing company, whatever it is. You learn from these things and you fill in those gaps later on. But we're here early enough that we're all learning together. And if you stick around long enough and you're industrious enough, you can figure out where to fill the gaps. And again, that's not my like. I'd love to take credit for that, but that I'm paraphrasing Gary Vee there. So
Yeah, so much life alpha happening in this episode. I want to point out a couple commenters here. Mylon is asking, or actually told us that 4 of the nodes had the same owner. So you want to talk
there you
about
go.
centralized? That is a great point. So thank you, Mylon, for that. Prodigy's asking about esports. Maybe we should hop back into parallel because we took a super long diverge here into like a
Sure.
good rabbit hole, which I thought was a good conversation. But we'll get to the esports comment here in a second. But let's jump back into parallel, like as it stands today. How can somebody get involved? What are the factions? What does kind of that meta gameplay look like today?
Okay. These are all great questions. So let me just first, before I get into what are the factions, let me just get into the story of Parallel. So the idea here is in the not too distant future. So Parallel takes place in the very distant future, but in the not too distant future, humans have created a technology they believe will create renewable, infinite energy. Um, and they go about, uh, you know, creating this thing, and something goes horribly wrong. And they realize very quickly, okay, what we've done is going to set off a cataclysmic event very soon that is going to make Earth uninhabitable. So, as humans do, they scramble to survive. Some people go to Europa, which is like a Jupiter's moon. Some people shoot out into like the asteroid belt and kind of live off the minerals and stuff that they find in the asteroids. Some people try and colonize Mars, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then, and some people are left behind, as always. You know, there's always some people left behind. And this cataclysmic event occurs, and years and years and like thousands of years go by, and now we're in the future. And it turns out what we did actually worked. It just took thousands of years to gestate, and now the Earth is energy rich. And all these factions have evolved separately. So that the people that went to Europa have evolved differently, and the people who are on Mars have evolved differently, and they've all now are all coming back to Earth to for their reasons. And they find out actually there's a faction of humans who survived on Earth. But they're all very different from one another. So like they're almost all alien to one another. But if you asked any of them like what are you, they would all say, well, we're human, right?
Mm.
And so that's kind of where the story of Parallel takes place. So we have the Earthen, which are the people that remained on Earth, and you know maybe were imbued with some interesting abilities because they remained through this gestation process. There's the Markolians, who that stands for Mars colonists. They colonized Mars, and I won't go into too much of the flavor of it. There's the Cathari, which are they're a clone race, and they're the ones who inhabited Jupiter's moon. There's the Augencor, and so they're part they're it's you know all about augmentation. They're part machine, part man. They're the ones who live in the asteroid belt. And then there's a very mysterious group called the Shroud. They actually took off before any of this happened on a sort of generation ship to try and explore deep space. Got sucked into a black hole, and then spit out after this happened. But for them, no time has passed.
So
But
they look like
weird
regular
things,
humans
yeah,
almost.
but weird things have happened to them too, because who knows what happens when you go through a black hole and come out the other end.
Can I just
And so,
can I put something
yeah,
out here real quick? As Mr. Gons is talking about this, Prodigy, if you could throw up a poll here and of like Ogden Core. Let me make sure I get this. Cathari. You can go on parallel.life/cards to find this. But let's throw up a poll to see who everybody is or would want to be as we kind of hear this.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. So those are the factions. And then of course we have a pool of cards called the Universal card pool. And the way the game works is when you make a deck, you choose a parallel, and your deck can only consist of cards from a given parallel and the Universal pool. And who are the people in the Universal pool? Well, just like humans now, you know, there's always people that operate in the gray areas. You know, like if America went to war tomorrow, not every citizen of America is jumping on planes fighting that war, right? Some people are staying at home, some people are maybe selling guns to the other side or whatever. There's all this sort of gray area that exists, and of course, because we operate in a, you know, maybe a future world, but we want to ground it in reality. There's going to be a faction of people that don't necessarily want to sit on any side of this conflict, and or maybe make profit for themselves. So there's, you know, profiteers and pirates and all this other stuff that exists in the universal card pool. But yeah, I mean, at its core, those are the parallels. Sorry, what were the other questions?
I honestly forgot because I'm so enthralled with how you guys are building your lore. I mean, you talked about it when we first had you guys on a year ago, but so many things have happened. Take me through kind of the development of the project throughout the past year. You got like a couple of the things that I've seen over the past year, for example, awesome like physical cards. You guys have some awesome like physical NFTs, which not that doesn't exist that much in NFTs. A lot of it's kind of just digital, and
Yeah.
in my opinion, that's kind of lazy. But that you're also a trading card game, so it makes sense that you guys are doing it. So take me through this AR move too, like all these little developments that you have going on in parallel.
Yeah, so I think as a group, and especially Kalos as a leader, is very interested in exploration of all things. Like obviously, I've said it a bunch of times, our core offering, our core uh, focus is delivering a fun game, but at the same time, we want to push the space in as many ways as possible. So, AR is just an example. It's just, okay, so you have an NFT. What else can it do for you? Well, maybe we create these full, not just AR assets, because that's always fun, but it's really just a fun way of looking at 3D assets, right? So we,
Mm.
we create these full 3D assets, and then given the rise in talk about metaverses and composability and all that stuff, like maybe we offer these 3D assets to the people who own the cards, and they can do interesting things with them. Not just have them in AR, which is amazing, but also you know have them exist in these metaverses, create other game like experiences that you can use them in. And then, of course, the AR portion of it is like, well, maybe then we now explore our own, what does an AR version of Parallel look like? Or maybe it's its own AR game that we can come up with and, explore that. And of course, the physical thing is just like the opposite side of that. We all enjoyed going to card stores and buying cards. Well, what does it look like if maybe we start selling cards at card stores, or you can you can take your NFT and claim a physical out of it, and have that tactile experience. Because like again, I point to the records for the third time behind me. Like I can listen to all that stuff on Spotify. Why do I own the records? I like having the thing, and I like sort of going through the ritual of opening it up and listening to it. And the same reason why, hold on one sec, I have beside me some magic cards, right?
Very
Physical magic
nice.
cards. It's just like I don't even play physical magic all that much anymore, but just to have the stuff is just like, I'm a collector. I like having that stuff around. And so that's just another thing that we want to explore. And of course, there's all sorts of avenues. And I think that extends to the sort of crypto blockchain side of things too. Like we built the inbox tool because we were like, hey, this is lacking, and let's explore what we can do with it. Maybe there's some other tools that we can come up with for the space to use. And really, it's just because as to our previous conversation, we're kind of in the Wild West early stages of things. Like, if something's lacking, why don't we just try and build it?
So I'm interested in this gameplay mechanic, right? So for someone who comes in, do they need to have any parallel cards to actually play the game? How does that look like inside the website? Is there going to be a native app developed? Like outside of the collectible aspect, which you guys are doing a good
Yeah.
job of, the actual gameplay, what does that look
Yeah,
like
so
today?
we have a desktop client that we're testing internally to get the balance just right, and I'm positive eventually we'll be showing off some gameplay at some point, but there will be a native client, Mac, PC, eventually mobile, all of that sort of stuff. You will not need to buy the NFTs in order to play, or at least try the game. I think our goal is to offer starter decks for all the players, and uh, NFT versions of cards as well as non NFT versions of cards. But the sort of, if you want to enter into the play to earn element, or you want to maximize, I should say, the play to earn element, the NFTs might be your way to go. And there's all sorts of keys and stuff that I don't want to get into all that right now, but um, the goal here is, again, to make a game for gamers. It would be unfair if anyone can download Runeterra, can download Hearthstone, can download MTGA, and start playing it and not give them a cent. Who are we to be like, you've never heard of this game, you've never played this game, it's got a bunch of mechanics you've never tried before, but pay us a bunch of money before you can play the game? That's ludicrous, right? So we're going to allow people to play the game, and in the same way that most of these other games operate, grind and earn their way to certain milestones so that they can fill out their deck, or you have the NFTs and you get there much faster, or you're already there. Like you'll have cards that the non NFT cards won't be sellable, won't be tradable, won't be whatever. But the NFT cards, will have their own marketplace. You can earn prime on them. You can spawn them if you're interested in what card spawning is and all of this stuff. Like we're working out a system potentially to allow you to create NFTs based on your NFTs. So if there's a market inefficiency, let's say you own the Recon card, and there's a high demand for Recon, you can create a copy of that card if you own it
Mm.
through ways that I won't really get into. If you're interested in that, I would read the parallel paper as well as the echelon paper, and dig deep into all that stuff. I'm not going to talk on it because I'm not qualified to talk on it. But yeah, there's a bunch of exciting stuff happening. We're always trying to push the envelope as far as the tech is concerned.
Yeah, I could tell that from the first time we had you guys on, and since then you guys have been doing a lot of development. I want to kind of touch on this esports part as well as I don't want to say balance, but more of like the pay to win model. It
Sure.
feels like to me like I play a lot of COD, I play a lot of League of Legends. Most of this like paid I guess assets are just skins, right? Like they have no basis in the game. Whereas
Yeah.
when I go into Hearthstone, I'm just like, dude, this sucks. Like you're playing competitive matches against people who have bought their essentially, pay. It's a pay to win thing. So
Sure.
how do you view that as a trading card game? Because I feel like that is a little bit of the difference I see in the ways that skins can be monetized in other games as opposed to trading cards.
Yeah, so I think that there's two sides to this, right? Like one is like I said, we're gonna offer non-NFT cards that can be earned, or you can buy or whatever, so that you can get to some of these cards that are more powerful. But okay, let's just say in a world there's an NFT version of a card that costs $200 on the secondary market, and you're like, well, I need three of those in my deck, but I'm not willing to shill out $600 to make this deck work. But if you grind enough, or you get these apparition packs or whatever, you'll be able to open the card and have that same sort of functionality. And there's actually a key called the multifold key that will, for the in-game purposes, make non-NFT cards NFTs for prime purposes, as an example. So there's still a way for people who aren't willing to like fully invest in the NFT market to sort of get their payout and continue to like level up their decks. That being said, I mean, I think that um, there's still an element where you kind of have to grind your way. If you're not willing to spend a cent, you kind of have to grind your way to what you want. So like, I was a Hearthstone player for a very long time who was unwilling to put any money into the game, and so really what it meant was I was competitive one out of every 3 seasons, because I was also not somebody sitting there playing all day. If you play all day, you'll grind your way to the best deck, no problem,
Mm.
for sure, for sure. But I wasn't doing that. So like I was earning enough in-game currency so that for 2 seasons I was doing whatever. But by the time the third season hit, I had enough currency and dust to create like
I
top tier
see.
meta deck.
Got it.
And I think that that's just kind of what it is, right? Like it is one of these things where you kind of either have to be really good at the game, which I wasn't, or you just have to be willing to put the time in to earn the cards if you're not willing to spend the money.
I want to touch on esports and guilds as it's related to like the play to earn, but also play to earn ecosystem, but also the parallel ecosystem. So, how are you viewing esports and then guilds within parallel?
Yeah, I mean, we're in some very early conversations with some people trying to figure out the esports side of things, because, in my heart of hearts, I would love for Parallel to be a competitive esports card game more than just like a fun game that people play on their computer. Like, I, this is gonna make me sound super nerdy, but I definitely watched, um, professional MTG and MTGA players and Hearthstone players, and I watched those streams, and I would love to see Parallel be a part of that. And as far as the crypto side of things, like obviously, there's going to be an element where we're going to allow for our version of guilds, which we call bonds, to exist, and people to lend cards to other people, and potentially work together to fill out those decks. So like that's another way, as an example, that you might be able to earn your way into a better, more competitive meta deck, as opposed to just spending money, is if you team up with the right people, potentially. Like, okay, let's just say, so there's 5 factions, right? Let's just say that me and you and 3 of our friends get together and we create a bond, and we kind of decide, like, you're going to be the meta Markolian player, and I'm going to be the meta Ogdencor player, and whatever. What we could do is kind of like either lend or trade or whatever each other our cards in this bond, and work our way up so that we have the best versions of the cards for each faction. And so that way you don't need to do as much work to kind of get there. You're working with other people, and I'll also throw this in: we're working on a mode that I haven't seen in any other card games, which is a team mode. So it's a 3v3 mode, and it's not what you think it is, like 3v3, all 6 people sitting around a table playing one game. It's more like 3 head-to-head games, but there's some overlap with the team. And I don't want to explain it because I don't want to take up too much time here, but
Yeah.
but I think it will be really exciting, because imagine, the same way that you queue up in a game of Apex Legends with your 2 buddies, you could do that in a game, like Parallel or Hearthstone or whatever, and you're all sitting there chatting, talking strategy in real time while facing off against the other team's 3 players.
Have you played? I'm guessing here that you haven't, but have you played TFT at all? Did you see the double beta that they had?
Oh, so I have played TFT. I've not seen the doubles.
Yeah, there's a double up kind of beta there, which kind of plays into what you're talking about, where you're like trading players. It adds a cool element
Yeah,
to play with like a
for
friend.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that that's one of the elements that card games have been missing for a long time. Because, again, the reason why we started
So
making this
true.
game is because we were playing games together, and we are like, we want to make a game that people can play together. So,
As
yeah,
opposed to competitively against each other. That's such a
right.
good point. Hey, we're coming up to the end. We got about 20 people in the house. Please get in your last questions here. This is the Nifty Q show. I do have Mr. Gon from Parallel. We're going to let him go here very shortly because we've been going over an hour here. But Mr. Gon, let me know anything else about Parallel that we didn't touch on before I let you leave, and maybe some last lightning questions from the community.
Okay, so all I'll say is parallel.life is the website. Follow at Parallel NFT on Twitter, and definitely join the Parallel Discord. I need to shout out a good friend and incredible community manager, CL, for managing the Discords and all the mods. And we have a bunch of names for the mods that I'm forgetting right now, but I gotta thank all those guys, inspiring teachers, and all the people that do all the work in our Discord. Because if you really want to get the source of information and you want to dig deep on any of this stuff, Discord is the place. And I will say this: every morning, Monday to Friday, generally speaking, we have a voice chat called Breakfast Club, and I'm routinely involved in that chat, and so is Kalos, and so is some of the other team members. So if you want to ask us questions, we're there to speak to you very frequently. So definitely join the Discord and find out more.
And make sure to check out the Life in Parallel podcast, which got another shout out here. Brand saying, who will be the next EP on the podcast?
Who do you want to be the next EP? I'm gonna see if I can rope in Cerebrus, but we'll see. He's kind of a busy guy, but that's kind of my goal for the next EP.
Dope. All right, I think we're gonna get out of here. Get your last questions in here. I have one final lightning question from myself to you, Mr. Gon. I see the Cryptodes sweater there. What's going on with Cryptodes, man? And what other projects you're interested in the NFT space?
Uh, okay, so this toad was actually a gift to me by some friends for my birthday. I didn't know what cryptodes were because I'm, like I said, like an NFT noob, but yeah, and I've since obviously learned a lot about them and become obsessed. So I wear mine with pride. As far as other NFT projects that I am into, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Crypto Walkers. It is the most hilarious, ridiculous, amazing project. I'm truly not even a part of their community. I just like to see half naked 3D people walking around. So that's pretty good. I would say I have to again shout out, visit my Museum of Oddities. oncyber.io/mrgon. And if you have anything to add, you can definitely send it to mrgon.eth. And lastly, I got to shout out a project that a bunch of the people in Parallel got involved with that is completely hilarious and was a bit of a mishap. And if you want to learn more about it, join me on Breakfast Club. But Chonkies, shout out to the
Yeah.
Chonkies for doing hilarious things.
Lito is asking about Marindao. Don't forget Marindao. And then Prodigy's asking when release date for the actual gameplay.
Never forget Marindao. I proudly display my Marindao Simp Pass in my OnCyber gallery, so it is there for everyone to see. As far as when is the release date? Well, the answer to that question is anytime somebody asks is pushed back by a month. So um, the release date is whenever we last said it was going to be released plus 1 month.
Plus 1 month. I love that, man. Mr. Gon, you were great today on the Nifty Q Show. Guys, we're here every week. It is Wednesday and Thursdays around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. We have founders, builders, leaders in the industry on the podcast. So thanks for tuning in. If you missed a segment of this and you tuned in late, you can either rewatch on YouTube or we have the audio version on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. But we are going to get out of here. Thank you so much, Mr. Gon, for popping on. I want to have Parallel on more and more as you guys keep growing.
Amazing. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was a great time.
Awesome. Later, guys.